Welcome to News Laundry. I'm Alpana Kishore and our guest today is Neelesh Misra.
Hi.
Welcome to the show. Let's start with your the biggest thing surrounding you at the moment, which I think is the radio show, which is based on an imaginary city. Tell me, it must have been quite difficult to persuade radio heads to start something like this in the middle of completely different kind of programming, in the sense that the last kind of storytelling that we heard on radio was Hawa Mahal years ago, and it had a distinctive tune, it had a distinctive set of listenership. At 9 o'clock sharp you heard it.
Right.
So how did radio heads react to this proposal of yours?
Well, I actually didn't have to make a proposal because radio happened purely by accident. I never wanted to do radio. I never thought I would be able to do radio.
Okay.
And I've never done radio in my life before Yaad Sheher. I had formed a band, which was a storytelling and song band, which is called Band Called 9. And the concept was that I was telling a story in the album we did with Saregama and on stage. And songs were interspersed. And we were looking for a radio partner. And we went to a couple of two radio stations, both really liked it. And Big FM, the CEO, heard the first, I think, 2 minutes. He said, "You have a lovely voice, can we do a radio show?" And I said, well, I don't think I can do what they do on radio. I said this in politer terms. I said, I can only tell stories. He said, great, let's do a storytelling show. And
so would you say that was actually his idea? It's not something you had thought of?
Yeah, absolutely. Me telling stories on radio was his idea. And then I said, okay, where will you air it? And they said in 35 cities. That's when I said that, then we need a concept that's universal enough for those 35 cities, because there are 35 Indias. You're going to Srinagar, you're going to Guwahati and Kota and Hyderabad and Lucknow and Kanpur and And I said, why not invent an imaginary city, and why not call it something like Yaad Sheher?
And what was your idea when you started working on it? What was going to go into this imaginary city?
By this time I had not written a single story for Yaad Sheher. I had no idea what it would be like. What I did know was that it would combine the richness of nostalgia, which I feel is vastly untapped in the Indian creative arts. I was the deputy executive editor of Hindustan Times. That was my last day job, and I had written a piece for Brunch on growing up with Doordarshan. That's actually what set this whole thing off. When I wrote that piece, it was more about my growing up in Lucknow and the by-lanes and my nani giving me amrood with namak and the rasgulle wala and that world. And the amount of feedback I've got for that piece is more than anything I've...
You mean people actually came back and said, we love Doordarshan, when we spent our childhood hating it.
Yeah, exactly. And so suddenly nostalgia was cool, and and there were people from the early 20s to 70s. And there was a guy in Singapore who said, I work for the stock exchange here. I just went to the washroom and wept after reading your piece, and my Chinese and American colleagues just don't know what the hell happened to me. There was this old woman in Ranikhet who said that, I don't know how old you are, but you seem like a nice guy. When you come to Ranikhet, come home for a cup of tea. There was an old man who said, I've started forgetting things, and I love the way you describe the small things, and I'm losing my memory, and I'd love to remember. So different people related to it in a different way.
So let me ask you here, when you did recognize that nostalgia is underrepresented, that's what you said.
Yes, absolutely.
And there is a market that exists, a huge untapped market that exists. Could you put your finger on the pulse of why? Why does it exist? Did you stop to analyze that before you started writing? What are the things we miss? I mean, like I told you, Doordarshan itself was something when I was growing up in the 80s.
Right.
It was like the worst thing in the world. There was Krishi Darshan and there was Chitrahar once a week. And I remember those days. They were not great days. They were awful days.
But the same days are now beautiful nostalgia.
Exactly. When you view it through this nostalgic lens, you said, well, the tune wasn't bad, and remember that. And so nostalgia has this powerful way of turning something even boring into something rose-tinted. So what are the things that go into your nostalgia, that Yaad Sheher nostalgia? What are the ingredients you pick?
Well, I did not scientifically plan Yaad Sheher, and now that I look back on it,
Can you analyze it now?
Yeah, I can actually, and very scientifically, because one of the last stories I commissioned while in my day job was a UNDP report which said that close to 7 out of 10 Indians live in a different city from where they were born, which means that leaving home is an idea which is almost as universal as love. Now, whether you got married into a different city, whether you're working in a different city, as it might be, but that then left a very large number of Indians in the millions with nostalgia and
Missing something.
And often because we give these we Instagram our images of the past, and we give it different hues and different tints. Like you said, it might have been really boring at that time, but it's become quite beautiful for us. So to me, Yaad Sheher was about seeking the extraordinary in the ordinary moments of life. I think if there was a brief, it was that to myself. And when we did a pilot then after the show was commissioned, and the story was called Diwali Ki Raat, which was a simple story about a man who's going for a meeting to a city like Delhi, which is about an hour and a half away from where he was born, a city say like Meerut. And he's not able to tell his parents that he's so close on the night of Diwali. And on the Diwali night, his parents, he thinks कि अब पापा कुर्ता पैजामा पहन के बड़बड़ा रहे होंगे, अब माँ ने मुहूर्त देख ली होगी अखबार में 3-4 बार, अब छोटी बहन जो पापड़ के लिए लड़ती थी, she must be grumbling why I haven't come. And then how he surprises his parents by landing at home. That's it. It's a very, very simple narrative. So most of the Yaad Sheher stories have, the drama in them is driven not by events, it's driven by emotion.
Okay.
People don't fall off cliffs and come, run down by cars. And the drama might be from a man standing alone on Marine Drive, having maybe lost his love, seeking directions in life, and so the drama is inside. Now, when that happened, one thing I did know very well was that when you create an imaginary city, people would begin to see their lives reflected in this city, in this city's characters. So when I said कि छुटकी जो मेरा आधा पापड़ खा जाती थी, people saw their own younger sisters. And when I talked about that neighbor, they saw that girl in the neighborhood who they probably had unspoken love for. And then the audience started interpreting it. I mean, within a week or 10 days, I knew we were on to something very big. The first thing I did was trademark Yaad Sheher.
Okay.
Because
smart.
Yeah, well, because as communicators, a lot of us are quite stupid, and we need to become more of soap salesmen in a good, healthy way. I mean, which in the last 2-3 years, while I moved to Bombay, I've realized that. I've realized that the guy who creates the content is bigger than the guy who writes the check for it, and I think we better assert that.
So tell me, when you've talked about it being nostalgia driven, you've talked about it being less drama, more emotion, and your stories, as far as what I have heard, are mainly to do with love of some sort. There's a big chunk of there's small romances or lost loves, or there are things, and of course there's other love as well, paternal love, maternal love, and things like that. Right. So it's this kind of say less conflict driven or less dilemma driven, more. Is that a conscious choice?
No, actually,
especially when we look back, and again I refer back to the iconic. We'll call that iconic now, the Hawa Mahal of the 70s and the 80s, which had actually great stories. There were some extremely interesting stories, but they were gripping. Yeah. Some of them were drama oriented, conflict oriented. People did fall off a cliff, or whatever you referred to. So this is a different genre in one sense, though it's the same type of programming you're doing, in the sense of telling a story on radio. It's just an audio kind of a gentle world. Right. So again, do you see room for this to expand, or are you going to keep it to this gentle, sort of enclosed, thought-driven, emotion-driven world?
The love stories are only a phase at this point.
Okay.
It's a run that we're doing now. When the show started, and the first season, which ran for 3 months, I woke up every morning and asked myself, who do I want to be today? Because I wrote every single story.
And how tough is that?
Oh, that's the toughest thing I've ever done in my life. I mean,
And it took you how long to finish a story?
one day.
So the whole day was.
I mean, it had to
spent
be.
in-
It had to be so. So I mean, often I would take about 4 to 5 hours to write this story, which would be about 2,800 words. And I've played all kinds of, and I say played because there's an element of the theatre in it. But female characters. I've been a kid. Male characters of all ages. There was a guy who was in a lunatic asylum. So at that point, it was not love. It was all
Okay.
sorts of relationships. In
Right.
fact, there was conflict. For example, there was a story called Black or White, where this little boy walks up to his father, and the father says कि आपने फॉर्म भर दिया इंजीनियरिंग का, and he says नहीं, ये आपकी सैलरी स्लिप है, आपकी तनख्वाह 30,000 है, ये सब कहाँ से आया? And he asked his father this very tough question, where did all this come from? There's the story about this woman who's just been married into a home, a story called Saregamapa, where she used to love playing the harmonium, and her father had gifted it to her. And she walks in and she hears her husband in the background say कि harmonium store में रख दो. And then every night, every afternoon, she sits facing the harmonium, which is 6 steps away from her, cries, cannot make those 6 steps, which is an act of liberation in her own life. And one day, how she does it, and then what happens. So, we've tried to weave in everyday India and the emotions of everyday India and how they impact us. A lot of listeners say that we didn't know this emotion existed in us. In fact, we didn't realize that we also thought this way. So the stories actually scrape something, and
That's what I'm saying, that you seem to be addressing a particular need which has been unanswered by film or by other media, social media or
Right.
whatever, other kinds of storytelling in different forms. So it is almost a genre in itself that you are then putting forward as, say, your trademark. I mean, that this is about nostalgia, it's about love, it's about longing, emotions, etc. Would you agree with that being the motif of your?
It is. Although
Okay.
I'm being now asked by other radio stations as well to do other sorts of
Other
stories
sorts of
as well.
stories, right.
For example, we tried to do suspense stories. And
That
while-
used to be Hawa Mahal,
Yeah.
not a suspense,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
a suspense.
And
yes.
we did it, and people loved it, and I love to do humor. I did a story called Ladies Tailor in season 1, which became very popular. So I had to do Ladies Tailor Returns in season 2, and this character called Babban, who is very uncomfortable around women, but he wants to be around women. So he follows his father's trade of becoming a ladies tailor so that he can be around women. That said, even the ladies tailor it was not slapstick.
Yes,
So
yes.
so the emotion and a very strong emotional current is the basis of a standard Yaad Sheher story. It's a given.
Okay. The other thing that I notice in those stories is a very strong small town ethic. I mean, for myself, having grown up in Delhi, for instance, Delhi was a small town then,
Right.
in the 80s, and it was a reasonably small town, but being the capital, it had the big power structure, but everybody else existed in this small little town at that point in time. So there is that powerful desire to keep that intact somehow, which we, after globalization, after Mandir, after Mandal, because everything is opened up so hugely, our cities have become so populated, you don't have that anymore.
Right.
You don't have the garden, you don't have the single-storied house, you don't have even the single ambassador car that everybody piled into, or
Right.
So that ethic seems to be very strong. Again, is that a deliberate
Yes.
to go back to a space, a peaceful old space where you can curl up and pretend everything is fine, and then you come out and face the world again. Is that conscious?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I believe that, in fact, I would say that India, a country with some of the greatest oral storytelling traditions of the world, from the Upanishads onwards, and we passed down this tradition. And at one point, and if we were to look for a notional milestone, it would be the arrival of cable television for me. And then economic liberalization, which opened up a whole new, vista and a whole new number of jobs. But working hours became longer, so the father who was coming back at 5
Yes.
now would come back at 9, and 9 would be okay, 11 would be actually late.
Yes. Yes.
So storytelling and hearing and listening to stories, which was a very, very important tool of companionship in family, in everyday India, just evaporated in one go. And so as the country itself changed, this form of entertainment, which was so universal, I remember my father, when he took us to our village in UP, he used to tell us stories under the sky. My grandmother used to tell me stories, and I had to keep pressing her feet and keep saying so that she knew that I was listening carefully. And that just ended. And so
And you grew up in?
I grew up in Lucknow, and then I went to school in Nainital.
Okay.
So, but Nainital shaped my small town romance, because the lake, college, writing songs for women, and Lucknow shaped my the richness of the bylanes and you know Nibu ka achar and rasgulle wala. So and I feel like, you know, there are two lines I say at the beginning of a show every day, which is baat be baat pe apni hi baat kehta hai, mere andar mera chota sa sheher rehta hai. And that small town is something we carry in ourselves, you know.
Is it also to address the fear? Just the fear of being, you know, I was talking to Prasoon Joshi the other day, and he mentioned that, again, I was talking about the small town ethic with him for his films, I mean, for his songs. And he mentioned that in 2030, 70% of India will be living in the cities. So one giant factor which you talk about is migration. And the migration from something very rooted, which is the soil, or the small town, or the familiar small space that you knew, to something huge, gigantic, full of flyovers, full of traffic, you know, 700 cars on a flyover, as one person told me when he came to Delhi and got completely, you know, befuddled. So that kind of culture shock that you get settling down in the big city, the migration from the country to the city, that produces anxiety and stress and fear.
Right.
You know, would those stories then be an attempt to somehow keep that core intact?
Well, to begin with, I don't agree that a large part of India would be living in the cities by 2030.
Oh, this is a statistic.
Right. I mean, I've just started a rural newspaper called Gaon Connection, and I know that I think it's a little pompous on part of us city residents to assume that the only goodness is lies in the village becoming a city.
No, it's just a fact, you know, that this would happen. It's likely to happen.
Yeah. But at the same time, rural income is rising, so you know, there is more contentment. In fact, at this point, rural India spends more than urban India for the first time ever, I think. That aside, I feel that the small town is an island of memory. It's the small town as we know of it, and as we fancifully romanticize it, doesn't exist.
We do romanticize it, yes.
But that's dead. When I go back to Lucknow, I find Burberry and Mac and everything, same thing that I would find in Delhi.
Yes. But through your stories, we don't know Mac, and we don't know Burberry, and we don't know McDonald's, and we're still existing with that single ambassador car, and you know, the softy ice cream or whatever it was, you know. And to me, it's quite. What interests me is that in 2012, people like us who have grown up in the 70s and the 80s and maybe the early 90s, there's a huge band of people outside this who've never seen those days, who grew up actually from childhood in the 90s. So they don't know what it means to not have McDonald's or to not have Burberry and so on. But they listen to your stories.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, why is that?
You know, when I first looked at the data on Facebook after a couple of weeks on how many people were listening in and where they were coming, I was shocked to see that 70% of the audience was 13 to 24 years. And it was because I thought that this show was about people who were, you know, people like me or people 30 and above, people who had seen that era, just like you said. So I often ask young listeners this question. I mean, I know of listeners as young as 8 or even younger who say ki acha Yaad Sheher wale uncle aa gaye, or they know the story, they know the characters. So I mean, it's really it's humbling and gratifying. And I think what as communicators we've not been able to do is that we often trivialize our young audiences, because 13 is the new 23, and we don't seem to know that.
No,
because
that still doesn't answer the question.
Yeah.
Why? They've never experienced that past, so they don't feel the nostalgia for it.
while they might not
What
have
is the thing that
Yeah.
might draw them into that world?
the emotion. They might not have seen the trappings of it or the props, but the emotional core is the same. And and I do feel that India's young audiences have a split personality. They would love Munni and Sheila. I myself like Sheila, but they also like Yaad Sheher. And it's the same people. And often you have, when Yaad Sheher airs at 9 o'clock, they leave TV to hear the show. And they've changed their hostel dinner timings. They've internalized it to a level that they've made it a part of their lifestyle. It's not
But see, there's even things like Ma and Babuji and things like that. This is not
Right.
mom and dad.
Right.
Your show is
Yeah.
concentrating
Yeah,
on that. That's what I say, small
absolutely.
town ethic.
Yeah.
That there's Babuji,
idiom is-
there's not dad.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you say aap. You don't
bilkul.
say, so there is a certain formality, a certain respect.
Yeah.
That is sort of old school.
Yeah.
And this generation has no idea of that, but it seems to enjoy it.
I was surprised that I'm technically an RJ, a term I do not like when I'm described as so, because I'm a radio storyteller. But within the first week of the show airing, everybody started calling me sir. And because they address other RJs in other ways, and
Yes.
by first name and as objects of desire, and etc.
Yes.
etc. I was sir. And I think that was so because the stories, I believe I am a socially conscious communicator, and the stories do, without being preachy, carry this message. And that's something that listeners always interpret, कि आपकी कहानियाँ हमको कुछ सिखाती हैं. Always.
इज्जत क्या?
Well, the respect for teachers, there was a story on HIV, there was a story on people of two different castes getting married. So, and I'm a very opinionated person, and I let that come into my stories, and I'm not ashamed of that. In sometimes I would, veer off a story and दोस्तों एक बड़ी फलाना है ये, चलिए कहानी आगे सुनाता हूँ, then I'll come back. So that also is there, and the plot itself might convey, what is basically a magnification of my thoughts and my belief in a certain way. So I think that, because I believe that you cannot be a good writer unless you're a good person. And the goodness has to come through the good, and I guess this applies for a lot of other professions too. But that seems to cut through the seeming barrier of age, frivolousness as we assumed it, or the fact that there is a whole array of other creative content available out there, and the option of going to a shopping mall or
Yes.
playing a game of on your mobile phone. But no, they hear the story for 2 hours straight now. I mean, 9 to 11. So,
Well, great talking to you, and I hope the show continues to be as popular
Thank you so much.
you do new things with it.
yes, we are actually. In fact, we've just released a series of books at the Jaipur Lit Fest, which compile the stories into a series of books. What I've also done is that I'm mentoring a team of writers called the Mandali.
Okay.
They also write for the show, and I also write as and when I can. A very talented young band of writers. And next, we are taking the Yaad Sheher stories onto the digital platform where people can dial a number and hear a story. And we'd love to do, theatre. We'd love to do all sorts of things, because people see it as a real place. I mean, people write to me saying, "Your neighbor in Yaad Sheher."
Yes.
And we'd like to, embellish on the realness of that
Yes.
place. I mean, we're about to do a merchandising project where we will have Yaad Sheher chalans and Yaad Sheher high school certificates.
Certificates.
All that.
Well,
So it's been a great journey.
All good luck to you, and hope it goes ahead as you plan it and as you imagine it.
Thank you so much.
Neelesh Misra, thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.